Hi friends, today I'd like to describe 10 rules by which one can achieve success in managing very hard cataracts using the direct phaco chop technique. So let's get started. The basic rule number 1 is always take up the case under a peribulbar block, and sometimes sedation may be needed. Rule number 2 is if there is poor pupillary dilation, always use iris hooks or pupil dilating device. And even in good pupil dilation, make sure you add epinephrine to the BSS bottle if there are no contraindications. Take this case for example. The pupil size seemed adequate at the beginning of the surgery, but you see that with the progression of phacoemulsification, there is a pupillary shutdown which is bound to happen when you are handling hard cataracts. This of course can be circumvented if you had the presence of mind to use a pupil dilating device. In this case, I'm using a Gupta ring in order to keep the pupil at a fixed dilation throughout the entire phaco procedure. Now once you get the iris hook or any form of pupil dilating devices inside the eye, you can have the confidence that you're not going to have a pupillary shutdown. Pupillary shutdown will make visualization of the pieces difficult. You may not be able to visualize the capsular rhexis edge. Even mobilization of the large fragments may become difficult. See, in this case, the presence of a pupil dilating device keeps the pupil at a fixed dilation throughout the procedure, so you can get on with the job of breaking down this nucleus. The capsular rhexis size should be between 5.5 to 6 millimeters, and always stain the anterior capsule with trypan blue. This is because in hard cataracts you seldom get a good red glow, and the stained capsule will help visualization in case you encounter a pupillary shutdown as well. Now let's take a look at the capsular rhexis in this case. This is a grade 3 to 4 nucleus sclerotic cataract. Aim for a large capsular rhexis. Whether you're using a cystotome or you're using a uterine or forceps, the pupil in this case is around 6 millimeters. So I'm creating a pupil hugging capsular rhexis to ensure that I have a rhexis size that is more than 5.5 millimeters. Let's move to the next rule, which is the cortical cleavage hydrodissection should be done only with very small amounts or aliquots of BSS, and it has to be done at multiple locations. What is the reason for this? The fluid wave may not be able to lift the large size nucleus, and if you inject too much fluid, it will distend the posterior capsule and you will have a posterior capsular blowout, and this is why you have to do it at multiple locations using very little fluid. Rule number 5 is use a dispersive viscoelastic to coat the endothelium. This means chondroitin sulfate and not HPMC. Well, some experts can get by with use of 2% HPMC, and it's possible one has mastered the phaco-powered delivery and the plane of emulsification perfectly. But let's get started with chondroitin for our purpose. Rule number 6, expose the phaco tip adequately. Now let's take an example of this case. The phaco tip is exposed to just about 1.5 millimeters. This is inadequate in this very hard grade of cataract. You can bury the tip only to the junction between the phaco tip and the start of the sleeve, and this is not of adequate depth. We know that the depth of burying is inadequate because of two things. One is there will be a rotation of the nucleus when you try to effect the chop, and secondly you will end up with uneven sized fragments, both of which are sine qua non for an improper depth of burial of the phaco tip. You have to expose the tip to a generous 1.7 to 2 millimeters, so you can bury the entire length of this phaco tip into the nucleus substance at the correct angle of attack, and doing so bury the entire tip into the nucleus substance, and then when you create the chop you will get a nice through and through chop. Phaco settings is of paramount importance for direct chop. The power needs to be about 40 to 50%, and that will depend on the machine. Use the multi-burst mode if you have it, with a burst duration of 20 to 30 milliseconds and a duty cycle of 70 to 80%. Multi-burst is not a single burst which becomes continuous or pulse or micropulse. Some machine have these settings. If you don't have multi-burst mode, work with the pulse mode with high power 70 to 80%, low pulse rate 10 to 20 pulses per second, and you set the power in the non-linear mode or the panel mode so that the full power is delivered the minute you go into foot pedal 3. There are 3 more advanced rules which I will highlight as we handle this grade 4 nuclear sclerotic cataract. Let's apply the rules we've just learned in the management of this cataract. This is a pretty black cataract. It's so obvious that it is about grade 5 to grade 6 nuclear sclerotic cataract. The pupil is well dilated. I've added epinephrine to the drip. I'm not using pupil dilating devices. I'm staining the anterior capsule and creating a nice clear corneal incision which has got a good length of the corneal valve. Now, while creating the capsulorhexis, because of the bulging nature of this nucleus, the chamber was little shallow, so I preferred to use the cystotome to create the capsulorhexis. So you see that this pupil is dilated to about 8 millimeters, and I'm creating a capsulorhexis that's about 2 millimeters less than the size of this, between 5.5 to 6 millimeters. If the chamber shallows, always come out, form the chamber with viscoelastic and then continue with the capsulorhexis. Don't try to create a capsulorhexis with a shallow chamber. You don't want a rhexis runoff in these patients. Now the cortical cleavage hydrodissection. Small amount of fluid injected at multiple locations. Remember, very little fluid is enough in order to split this cortex, because the cortex is just a thin sliver between the nucleus and the capsule, and it's very easy to rotate the lens. I'm filling the anterior chamber with chondroitin sulfate, which is a dispersive viscoelastic. Use the correct instrument for the job, a 1.7 millimeter sharp tip chopper and a Phaco tip exposed to 2 millimeters, using the power settings and the mode in multiburst mode as I already described. Rule number 8 is start the chop close to the nucleus edge. See the second instrument, it goes close to the nucleus edge. Now this is what I call the combo chop, because it seems to be a combination of the horizontal and the direct vertical chop, and the logic behind starting the chop close to the periphery is because the thinnest part of the nucleus is in the periphery, nucleus being spindle shaped. It's very easy to get the crack started in the peripheral location, and once you create the crack, you can bury into the crack and draw it towards the center and create a through and through chop. Also, make sure that the lateral separation that you do in this case is very minimal. So it's more important that once you get the crack, go to the depth and create very little lateral separation. If you create a very robust lateral separation staying superficially, this may cause a zonular dialysis because the entire nucleus fills the bag. Rule number 9, not 4 but 8 nuclear pieces have to be made. It is not like in a grade 2 nuclear sclerotic cataract where just 4 pieces are enough. Here, even if you create 6 to 8 pieces, each of the nucleus pieces or fragments that you create has enough volume that a 4-piece direct phaco chop will have in a grade 2 nuclear sclerotic cataract. So once you have downsized the pieces to small fragments, and I recommend 8 pieces in a grade 4, the final rule is you have to mobilize just one of the pieces at a time. For this, you should have created smaller pieces, you should have made sure that the crack and separation is good, and each of these small manageable sized fragments are mobilized one at a time into the anterior chamber. You see that I'm creating a much smaller fragment because this fragment seemed large, and I'm mobilizing it into the anterior chamber. The logic is you are emulsifying the nucleus with the bulk of the nucleus remaining within the bag. So you see that the entire nucleus is in the bag except for the small piece that you mobilize in the anterior chamber. This will create less smaller break-off fragments and be very friendly to endothelium. Talking about friendly to endothelium, somewhere in the midpoint of the case, you can put in some more viscoelastic. And now I'm switching over to the Sinskey hook because I have finished the chop maneuvers and I've separated the fragments. You no longer need the sharp long tip chopper to remain within the anterior chamber with the risk of nicking the anterior or posterior capsule. Make sure that while you are emulsifying the nucleus, you don't have too many free fragments floating in the anterior chamber. The majority of damage to the endothelium occurs during the fragment removal stage. This piece that is stuck near the incision, you can simply expel it by pulling the phaco probe back. The irrigation catches it and swivels it to the phaco tip, and then you can remove this piece. The cortical aspiration is done and the intraocular lens, which is a Hoya Nanex intraocular lens, is implanted within the capsular bag. These are the rules that have helped me in getting clear corneas even when I have handled very hard cataract. I hope it also works for you and I hope you try it out. You will see that at the end of the procedure, when I come out and try to seal the incision, the amount of power I've used has not created any form of wound damage at all. The wound is quite pristine. In fact, I don't have to do stromal hydration in this case because the self-sealing nature of the clear corneal incision will cause this incision to close, and all you have to do is inject a little fluid from the side port. Thank you for your attention.